You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Anyway, there isn't a ton of overlap between these two teams, but one in particular that is quite a lightning rod. LJ Cryer will be back at the Foster Pavilion for the second time since he went to UH. Parker seems to think that LJ Cryer is one of the very best we've ever seen. Let's talk about it next in the Locked On crossover. So, LJ Cryer, huh?
So I proposed this earlier this week when Houston had officially won the conference, and he had officially won his fourth conference title.
It's pretty impressive.
Four conference titles. He's the only guy to ever do that, having not played at Kansas. He's the only guy having done that with multiple titles at multiple schools. Mm-hmm. At this point, going into the Baylor game, he's like 70-something points away from half. So I broke this down and Locked On Coogs. But I think there's an argument that he's the best Big 12 player ever. I don't know he's the best Houston Cougar ever.
Wait. Is there an argument or is he? Because
I think
it sounded
he
like
is.
you said he is. Okay,
I think he is. I think he's the best Big 12 player ever. I know he's the best Houston Cougar ever, right? Hakeem Olajuwon, et cetera, right? I don't know that he's the best Baylor Bear ever. I'm sure you'd tell me a list of guys that. But as far as the conference goes, he's won the thing as an impactful player 4 times. He was on a national championship team. He's, in all likelihood, if he hits his averages, going to have the most points of the 26 players to ever win 4 conference championships. He's the only guy to not do it or to do it without going to Kansas. The two schools thing feels important to me because it's like it went with him. I know Houston is a good program, right? But like the winning went with him. Baylor, we just talked about, is like looking at a 10 seed this year, right? I mean, it's a little different.
Yeah, well, this is 2 years removed from LJ. I don't know how much of an effect that is on that. But
I say that to say that, like, I mean, I think would you take the 15 points per game back right now? Like, I think that like I think he is, and I think the Big 12, you got to think about it's like a 30-ish year old conference. Mm-hmm. The Big 8 being separate, the Southwest Conference being separate. It's a very unique statement, especially when you think about like all those Kansas guys, the 26 that have done the 4 conference championships, they kind of all played together, right? So like they had to lean on one another.
And half of those guys are scrubs,
right?
Right, like just guys who were on the team.
Of the 26, only 14 started for a season, so at least one season.
A season, yeah. To be fair to LJ, started for 4 of his 5 college seasons, 3 of his 4 championships.
And I just think that. I think that that's all very impressive. And again, I don't think he's the best Cougar ever. I do think, though, that there's something about this like Big 12 conference as a great basketball conference with great basketball brands. We haven't seen that before. But Baylor fans feel a very different way about LJ than Cougar fans do about him coming home. And so I'm interested. I mean, maybe that's why no one's running with me on this.
Well, I'll address this part first. Like, obviously, he got the hometown treatment last year, coming back when you transfer in the conference, like that's what happens, man. I don't think there was anything below the belt or anything like that. I know it came up again and again. There was some comments on Instagram posts. So that didn't go away. Like it did come back. I might be wrong about this. I did famously say before last year's NBA Finals that the Celtics fans were kind of over the Kyrie thing, and I was wrong about that. It was just me that was over the Kyrie thing. And I'm going to say it again. Like I might be in the minority here, but I think the Baylor people are more or less over the LJ thing. There'll be some boos for sure, but I don't think it's going to be a huge deal.
Classic Cam Stuart. Forgive and forget. Move on.
I've never held a grudge in my life, man. But like I will say we would absolutely take the 15 a game last year. It was kind of a thing I thought about, or this year. It's kind of a thing I thought about last year of like LJ was in a better situation. Houston was a better team, but I don't know that like Baylor needed him last year. Certainly this year they did. Like they don't have any outside shooting threat really. The numbers for some reason are still pretty good offensively, but those of us who watch know that like absolutely you could take a knockdown shooter. You would take that in a second. But all right, let's get back to this Big 12 GOAT thing. So the way you're looking at it, Parker, right? You want a 4-year guy. You're not going to take one season of Durant, one season of Michael Beasley.
I think it's just too different. Durant didn't get out of the first weekend of the NCAA tournament.
Correct. Yeah, for sure.
I think that there's some
Kansas State did. I don't know.
Or like Blake Griffin might have played 2, right? Like, I think it's just different when you're like supremely talented, but you're only here for a cup of tea, right? That's not quite the same thing.
Here's my argument, and this might shock you. All right, just strap in. You think LJ Cryer is the best player to ever play in the Big 12 based on accomplishments and being a pretty good player along the way. I say, tired, LJ Cryer is the Big 12 GOAT. Wired, LJ Cryer was never the best player in his own backcourt. Parker, how can that guy be the Big 12 GOAT?
So
he plays with Jared Butler, who I will argue is a better Big 12 player than LJ Cryer. Then he's in the same backcourt as James Akinjo, All-American. The next year, Adam Flagler, All-American. The next year, Jamal Shed, best player in the country. And then the next year, Uzan is the guy that everyone is into, and I was wrong about Milos Uzan. I thought that was going to be a tougher transition than it was. So I could make an argument that he wasn't even a factor on the 21 team. He's got the ring, and go with God. Like, that's great. I'm not trying to say but he just wasn't a factor on that team. So I don't know how you could say he's the Big 12 GOAT when I don't even think he's been the best guard on his team any of the years.
I do think there's something about being malleable and going for, because those are, you mentioned 4 very, very different guards, right? Like the shape shifting you go with those 4 guys. I mean, Flagler and Shed are incredibly different guys.
Right. Yeah. Akinjo isn't like any of them. Yeah.
I think the thing though is that he kind of let his scoring. I mean, he's a tremendous scorer, right? I think that's obviously like his big thing. He's a great shooter. You mentioned outside shooting. He let his game fit in with whatever they were doing. And each of those guards, I mean, he didn't play point. He never ran point. I think that's for a guy that at 6'1" to find his way on the floor, not running point is not an easy thing to do. And I will admit that I would obviously pick Jamal Shed over him in a one game scenario, right? Jamal Shed was the best player in the conference a year ago. You can run through the Baylor list again. I'm sure I'm probably say the same thing.
Yeah.
3 of the 4 in the American. I think that the reason that I don't see that as big a problem is because it was pretty consistent, and maybe this is my own bias, that the backcourt he was on was the best backcourt in the conference, right? He's a part of it each time. And again, if you look at the longevity of it going across 4 years, there's some common denominator there.
I mean, yeah, and that's the thing. LJ's a very good player. I'm not going to take that from you. But when we're talking GOAT conversation, I look at Jared Butler, and I look at their 2 best seasons, and Jared Butler is averaging more and shooting the same percentage from 3, which is undoubtedly LJ's best attribute. And that in that best season, Jared Butler also won the Final Four Most Outstanding Player. LJ's not had that shot yet. His season's not done. But I'm looking at this. I'm like, Parker, man. And by the way, the thing that really bugs me is, you know who my pick would actually be? Ooh. If we're doing the 4-year thing, I won't pick Beasley or Paul Pierce or anything like that.
Okay, then now I'm intrigued.
What really bugs me is my pick isn't OU Sooner. My pick is Buddy Hield.
Oh,
I mean, LJ had a great 15 a game. Buddy Hield had 25, led the nation in scoring, 46 at Fog Allen, led them to the Final Four. Much like the Houston experience, they don't want to talk about being in the Final Four, but they were there, and he was really great. And I saw him live. Buddy Hield, I think, might be the best 4-year player.
Well, and I will say, so they didn't win the conference all 4 of those years, but obviously they were.
That's a team stat.
They were pretty good each of those 4 years. I think the interesting thing is because he is so young when Baylor wins, the Kansas guys' arguments, like Devontae Graham didn't win a national championship, but Devontae Graham is kind of in the same classification from Kansas. He played with Perry Ellis, who would also be in the same classification.
Yeah, so you're saying it's tough to just put LJ over those guys because he has the national championship when he was the 9th guy on the bench.
It's significant in that it's on his resume. I think the other thing is those guys played together, and they won the conference together each time. The big transition for LJ is going from Baylor to Houston, and he keeps winning the conference, right? That feels important as far as evaluating who is the best in the conference, right? I mean, winning, it's got to.
Yeah, he's just trophy hunting. He's just
latter part of his career, trophy hunting LJ Cryer.
Yeah, I mean, kind of, yeah.
Okay. You brought up something that's intriguing though, because
Kirk Heinrich doesn't do anything for you.
Who?
Kirk Heinrich doesn't do anything for you.
I mean, he'd be on this Kansas thing. I don't think he had 4 though.
I do think someone else won in those years. They went to the national championship game his last year. That's when they won.
That was the same era as Hollis Price at Oklahoma with Kelvin Sampson, for what it's worth, and TJ Ford, a Houstonian guy, but he was at Texas, right?
Same Final Four, I think. I think they were also in that one. Yeah.
Ford was at a Final Four. I don't know if Oklahoma was. Kansas was, though, right? Anyway, I just had to say that you brought up an interesting thing is, are you the kind of person that values like the one Durant year being like, but he was incredible. Like, man, that one, like that's a wholly different argument.
Sure.
That is 1 year. And again, I'd be like, well, Shed was really good for that one, but.
Yeah, I go back and forth on it. So one of my favorite things to argue in anything in life is the Baseball Hall of Fame. And so I'm one of those guys who loves like a great peak versus stats compilers. And I wouldn't even call LJ like a stats compiler necessarily, but yeah, it probably needs to be more than 1 year. But like, I hate discounting a Jared Butler who played 3 years, or, someone who had 2 great years in the Big 12. Versus just, LJ playing 5 and having 4 conference championships. So yeah, I mean, I am a peak guy, but it's tougher to do in college.
If Houston got to the Final Four this year, and again, for what it's worth, I think they get there last year if Shed stays healthy, but he wasn't. They didn't. If they get to the Final Four this year, he's the guy leading the team in points. Does it like catapult him to the top of this list? I mean, because you seem to be disagreeing with me on a Jared Butler case.
Yeah, I mean, it would certainly help. But the thing is, like, when I'm talking about the best player ever to play in a conference, I would like them to be an All-American. That's a big thing. It, like, no doubt on this, if that scenario happens, and even right now, he's right up there. But if that scenario happens, where he's the leading scorer and they go to the Final Four, he is one of the most accomplished players in the history of the conference. Like, if not the most. I mean, that's 2 Final Fours with 2 different teams, with 2 very different roles. That's really impressive. I don't think I can call him the GOAT. That's why college, you got to go by season. Like, who has the best season?
Well, and truthfully, there's something to be said about most of these guys that have those high peaks won't be in college for 4 years. That's kind of, especially in this pre-NIL world, like that the whole thing would have been that they left. I guess we can talk again in April when the whole thing's over. And if they've gotten to the Final Four and he's the high scoring, lead point man, it'd be a little bit different argument. I just didn't think it was right that the country just kind of moved past that. This guy won the conference 4 times. Like, and we're just kind of moving on.
Like, yeah, I'll give him that. It's pretty amazing. And of those 4 teams, he was I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say he's a pretty big contributor for 3 of them. Now he gets hurt in January of that 22 season, not his fault. But he was a starter on that team. So it is pretty impressive. This game on Saturday night, I don't know how impressive it'll be, but we've got to tell you who's going to win and why, because we've got to wrap this show up. That's coming up next on this Locked On Baylor, Locked On Coogs crossover.